My name's Sue Deval, and I'm a consultant social worker with the West Midlands Social Work Teaching Partnership. And those people listed below are all members of our partnership who have kindly supported us and contributed to this morning's session, and who will introduce themselves as we go through the presentation and they do their different bits. But I'm very grateful for them to give their time to support us this morning. Just quickly, for people who might not know, we are one of 27 teaching partnerships across the country. We're actually the largest teaching partnership with 22 partners, comprising local authorities, trusts and higher education institutes. And our vision as a partnership is what it says there: to achieve excellence in social work, education and professional practice through a co-produced, research-led and strength-based approach. And one of the aims that we work towards is to ensure that students undertake high quality statutory placements which develop their knowledge, skills and experience to practice as newly qualified social workers. And it's with this aim in mind particularly that we've put on this webinar this morning as one of a suite of CPD sessions that we offer to social work training, social work practitioners across the region. So you're very welcome this morning. So what are we aiming to consider? We're very mindful that the PEPS courses provide practice educators and on-site supervisors with a lot of information about the detail of their role. And many of our HEI partners offer ongoing support through briefing sessions. So we don't want to cover too much of that this morning, but what we really want to concentrate on, given the increase in flexible working patterns, the greater ability to work at home, dispersed teams, hub office-based locations, and generally fewer in-person team activities, we did think it was important to have a session focusing on the importance of the team approach to supporting students. So we're hoping that at the end of the session, you will feel an increase in your confidence and your ability to provide high quality placements and reimagine how a team approach is possible in the current working environment. So in terms of questions, if people have got questions or points that they would like to raise for discussion, please put them in the chat and we will monitor it, and we have allowed time at the end for some questions, so we will come back to them at the end. So please do feel free to use the chat function. So just a little bit of background to the webinar. The original, the teaching partnership did a webinar back in 2021, and they looked at topics such as the application and interview process for social work courses, reasonable adjustment process, the roles, the different roles of people in placement, what a learning organisation is, amongst other things. And however, at that time, sort of, very close on the back of COVID, well, still in COVID really, it wasn't clear then quite how significantly our working practices would change and how some teams, how it would change permanently, and particularly how much Teams and Zoom would become embedded in our work. I'm sorry, there's someone who's just joined, I think, hasn't got their microphone turned off. If they could just turn that off, that would be fantastic. Thank you. And so I think, and even services that went back to face-to-face working, there's still a lot more working at home. There's a lot more online meetings, team meetings, peer support, supervision online. And this session, we just wanted to reflect sort of, a few years on from 2021, though much of that webinar is still relevant, but particularly to focus on this team approach to supporting students and how difficult it is with fewer opportunities for that informal learning environment that is created just by being in the office. And the other aspect was that we also had a task and finish group last summer that talked about readiness for placement practice. And the sort of particular themes that came out of that were around professionalism and the impact of hybrid working on the ability to assess and support a student and to evidence their professionalism in the placement. And the recommendations from that working group particularly was looking at the importance of considering hybrid working arrangements at the point of mapping and matching students into placements, and consider placement expectations around hybrid working, whether students have suitable private space and confidential space in which to work. And a recommendation from that group was that we would revisit this webinar and revisit this conversation about what is a team approach and how do you do it and how can you and what do you need to think about, really. So that's a bit of the background to the webinar. Just before I hand over to my colleagues, just looking at the team as a secure base. So some of you may be familiar with this. The original secure base model comes from the work of Schofield and Beck and the University of East Anglia, and it was actually introduced in relation to work with foster carers, but it has been adapted to various different settings. And in this particular instance, it's thinking about the secure base in terms of a team environment. The concept comes from attachment theory and the idea that our relationships with significant others who are available and sensitive to our needs and reliable provide us with a safe haven to return to when life is stressful. And the model can be used by practice educators and on-site supervisors to reflect on the ways that you might behave to promote a secure base for your student across the 5 domains of availability, sensitivity, acceptance, cooperation, and team belonging. And we just thought it might be useful to just start off with showing this model, because this sort of webinar is helpful to just reflect on what aspects might be relevant to your team or not particularly. And my last slide is just, it looks at those different dimensions and the definitions as described by the model across the 5 different areas. But just sort of things to be thinking about under availability. You know, can team members call on support from each other or you as if you were a more senior member when needed, or as the practice educator or practice supervisor? And how do you create teams and systems and a culture of availability in your team? And later we're going to think about a few examples of what you do or could do within your team for your student, how you can make it a joint responsibility, and how it might be affected by availability. And you know how diversity may play into that availability. So these are just things for you to be thinking about and take away to mull over in your own team situations. In terms of sensitivity, are you aware of individual needs in relation to managing emotional parts of the job? How do you know when team members are stressed in your team? How do power differences affect the extent to which a student might feel confident to share vulnerability, and how could you support this? In terms of acceptance, is there a team culture which encourages the use of mistakes as a learning opportunity, or how are mistakes reacted to within your team? And how do you acknowledge or praise when things go well? How might culture, ethnicity, and diversity influence the judgments team members make to one another? And then under cooperation, how is skills sharing encouraged within your team? How is it clear? How is collaborative problem solving experienced? And finally, under team membership, just very simply, how do you welcome new and say goodbye to old team members? What induction is available, and how does your team manage change? So those are just some of the things to be thinking about from a team perspective as we go through the rest of the webinar. So I'm now going to hand over to Marcia, and allow her to introduce herself. Thanks, Marcia.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for that introduction, Sue. You've actually made me think about my journey into Coventry. So just a little bit about who I am. My name's Marcia Squire Wood, and I was recently recruited to work for Coventry, the Social Work Academy, and my main role was to support and assess the social work apprenticeships. And but I come into this with a broad range of experience, having been an off-site practice educator, having been a practice educator that worked within the Birmingham City University, and recognizing the importance of preparing students for when they go out into to work. I think the slide that you've just presented, Sue, really made me think about my starting point at Coventry, at the Social Work Academy, in terms of a secure base and working in this new world that we're working in terms of post-COVID, and how the team were very instrumental in making me feel part of the team, how I felt that I had a secure base. And the importance of that was that for me, having a manager that recognised that working part-time, coming in just 1 day a week, that ability to form relationships is a little harder. So my experience is not that dissimilar to what students might experience. So moving on to the importance of preparing students before you go out onto placement, what do you want them to know? I think what is really important as a practice educator is the importance of setting out really clear learning opportunities that offer a range of experiences for your social work students. Now, bearing in mind that you might be taking students that are in year 2, which is a 70-day placement, or students in year 3, which is a 100-day placements, they're going to come into this with a broad range of experiences that you're going to have to build on. What is really important, I think at the heart of all of this, is building and establishing a good relationship right from the beginning, from that moment that you see that student profile to the moment they come to your office to meet you. So discuss with the student their learning needs. So what exactly are their learning needs? And I think a starting point here is recognizing that most students that come to an agency will clearly have set out goals in terms of their learning needs that will have been identified at the university. So they've already come into the placement with maybe 3 or 4 objectives of what their learning needs are. What is really important when we're looking at inclusion, we're looking at working with diversity, is recognizing the individual needs of students and where they're coming from as a learner into social work practice. So as a practice educator, looking at do you need to take on board reasonable adjustments? Okay, what is reasonable adjustments? That might look very different for individual students if they've got a hearing impairment, if they've got a visual impairment, if they've got a mobility impairment. So I think the starting point there is having that conversation with the student about do they have any reasonable adjustments? If so, that would have been identified within the university, because most universities will have students will be assessed in terms of occupational therapy needs, occupational health needs, and have reasonable adjustments put in place. So once you've got that document, you've got a starting point to look at how you support the student. Um, I can't stress how important it is to have that document and to have that conversation. So that's built into the learning agreement at the start. I think an important thing to recognise is when you've got social work students coming to work with you and work alongside the team, is recognising that they've got a broad range of skills that they bring to the placement. And although they may feel quite apprehensive and that they don't have any skills, building up that relationship, you will be able to identify what skills they have. I think sometimes you'd be quite surprised that students might have hidden skills that are not just the soft core social work skills that they can transfer into practice. And what are their strengths? I'm thinking about my role at the moment, um, assessing and supporting social workers apprenticeships. My social work students are coming into this with experiences of maybe 10 or 15 years experience in a variety of settings, whether it be youth offending, family work, a range of experiences. So they've got those skill sets that they already bring to the placement. So recognizing that and building on that. I think a really important thing to get to grips with is looking at what motivates the students. Why are they on the degree, and why have they selected the placement that they're on? In terms of getting an understanding of that, most students will often come into university having preset ideas of what they want to do, whether they want to be a children and family social worker, whether they want to work with adults, whether they want to work with mental health. They've got an idea of what they want to do. Sometimes you may find what drives a student is personal experience, and that personal experience is what's motivated them into the social work field. And also, don't forget to find out about what work experience do they have. It might not be in a social work setting. It might not be in a voluntary setting. It might be just working at ASDA. But working in those shops, you've got a range of skills in terms of communication skills that you can bring into social work. What you need to be thinking about is specific terms and conditions. Now, what we're relating to here is the issue around the placement agreement. So within the placement agreement, the issue of confidentiality, you need to be very specific about what it is you expect from the students in terms of the working hours. What does that look like? So you're very clear right from the start. The agency hours are 8:30 till 5 Monday to Thursday. However, on a Friday, it's 8:30 till 4:30 or 4. So be very clear about that. So that and have that documented. What you also need to be looking at is recognizing that whilst they're students, they will also be entitled to study days. So finding out what those study days are and agreeing what that might look like. So for instance, it might be that the student prefers to have a study day on a Friday or a Monday or a Wednesday, but you might need to discuss whether that fits into your agency and have a conversation about that. I think this is really important. Sue talked about professionalism. So let's have that conversation about dress code. I think this is really important that you have a conversation about what is the appropriate attire that you expect your social workers to wear when they're on placement and when they're going out on visits. It might be an informal dress code. However, if you're working in a children and families team and there's an element of going to court, there may be a conversation about what is appropriate to wear to court or not. And also, I think a big thing when we talk about the team around the student, and Sue talked about this earlier on in regards to team membership, expecting the students to be part of team meetings. If you're having a team meeting in this world of COVID working, we often have students that we often have team meeting. It might be once a week, once a fortnight. So having those dates in the students' calendar that they're expected to attend to. And also the importance of sharing information. So the team sharing information with yourself and with the student. Okay, thanks, Sue. The next one. So moving on. Um, after after you've had that meeting, that really important meeting, it's really important that you prepare the team. And I think as practice educators, I think it's really important that you recognise that you're not on your own. You are working with other colleagues that have different skill sets, different expertise that can able you to support your student on their 70-day or 100-day placement. And it makes them feel welcome. Create a team profile. So it might be if the student starts on a certain day, finding out who's going to be in the office that day that they start. Um, Also, you need to talk about who will support the student in your absence. And if you're remote working. So if you're not there, do you have a buddy system? So that means that the student can tap into that person when you're not there. A good example of that when we talk about the secure base is I'm in the office today and there is nobody else in the office today. I'm actually working by myself today, but I'm aware that the team are around should I need to speak to somebody, but I also know that there's somebody there if there's decisions that need to be made from a managerial perspective. Students need to know that they're not alone to make important decisions. They can have those important conversations with a line manager. And then also, let's talk about we have a lot of students that don't drive. So what does that look like for the students? So this is having those conversations at the learning agreement stage about how they're going to get to visits, how they navigate a new location, and the importance of timekeeping. Because at the end of the day, they're there to deliver, to work with vulnerable people, and getting to different places is really important. So having that conversations about how you support non-driving students and how they're going to navigate their way by public transport. Because being late is not a good model that you want to promote with your social work practitioners. Also, part of your role is how you allocate work to the students. Now, this is really important because I think part of what you do as a practice educator, you're going to have that student working alongside you. So you will be shadowing their work. So making sure that it's appropriate work that is given to them that meets their learning objectives set out in the learning agreement. What's also important at the setting them up is making sure that they've got access to a laptop, making sure they've got access to a mobile phone, they've got their ID card, everything that they're required to have to do the job. And also having, if you have somebody within the team that is an administrator, that they have access to that person as well, so that they can navigate should you not be there or another member in the team is not there, that they can connect with that person in the setting. Thank you, Sue. Okay, looking at preparing for the student placement. So these are things that's really, really important that will enable them to breathe and to come to terms with your agency. So it's important that you have a corporate induction and you set out mandatory training that's expected of them. Give them a time scale. Your induction might look like it's 2 weeks, it might be 3 weeks, but ensuring that that induction program allows them to meet key people, access mandatory training, and it's something that is a must that must be undertaken. It might seem boring, but it has to be done because it helps them navigate the agency. Also, what do they need to know? You're working with other professionals. Do they know email numbers, email addresses, contact? Do they know the building, how they navigate the buildings? It's some of the things that stress students out are how you get in and out of buildings in terms of codes. A big part of your role as a practice educator is providing weekly structured supervision. So during your pre-learning agreement, your pre-meeting, having a conversation about expectations of supervision. Um, you will get help from the university. Most universities have a template that you could look at and you can have that conversation where you clearly set out what you expect from the students. But I would like to think that this is a two-way process as well. What you expect the student to get from you as well. And then you learn from each other. So is it going to be a week? Is it going to be an hour and a half? Having a conversation about whose responsibility is it to take the minutes? Okay, I know in my previous role as a practice educator, I had a kind of a rule that I would take the minutes for the first two supervision sessions, but after that, we took it in turns, alternately. And I felt that was really important because the students learned some very core skills about recording and taking ownership of their supervision. The learning agreement. Now, this is the real staple in terms of identifying what is going to be achieved while the student's on placement. It's good practice to have a learning agreement and looking at this in terms of a three-way. So for those of you who are not familiar with that, it's having your practice educator, having your learner there, and also having the practice supervisor alongside that learning agreement. This is essential. So everybody that will be supporting the student is there agreeing what is going to happen. Okay.
Thank you very much, Marcia.
Okay, thank you. I think I'm on time. I think if there are any questions that people have got, if you put it in the chat, then I'm sure we can pick that up later.
Thanks very much. So I'm now going to hand over to Jane Phillips, who's going to talk about the expectations whilst the student's on placement. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you. I think I'm on the next slide, Sue. So you will hear a little bit of an overlap about what I'm saying and what Marcy is saying. So just to introduce myself, so my name is Jane Phillips, and I work for a local authority in the workforce development team. So I'm an off-site practice educator, and I also support social workers who have students. So I've been doing this role now. I worked out for 16 years, and actually it's scary how long it all is. And I started as a social work assistant 30 years ago, and I've qualified as a practice educator 20 years. So yeah, quite a bit of time has gone by, but every day I'm still learning something. So that's something that I'm very aware of. So these 3 slides are really just to think about when you have your student with you, what are the sort of things to think about. One of the first things we've got there is ensuring all of the team members know the name of the student, when they're starting and when they're ending. And this is really important. So remember to, email admin, as well as the social workers and social care practitioners. So there's nothing worse than somebody turning up and then other people thinking, oh, I don't know who this person is. So it's really nice that they know. Think about sending a welcome message, on that first day, and remember people have, telling the team that the students come in. So you might have told them 2 months ago that the students come in, but remind them as well on a Friday, maybe, oh, the students coming on Monday. And think about, are you going to be meeting the student in the team on that day? Who else is going to be around? So thinking about when the student's actually with you, Sue has, mentioned about, this hybrid work that we're working in. So make sure the student has the names of all the people in the team. And one thing that I like to ask the students to do is once they've got that list, to then contact each of them and say, hello, I'm the student, this is me, and introduce themselves. And that way they get to speak to individual workers within the team, and they can find out their specialist areas of interest, and then they can always come back to them in the future to ask more questions. But also I feel that once they've actually met that student, and it could be online, it could be over the phone, maybe they've got that extra bit of buy-in from that team member that's thinking about, oh, we've got a student in the team, oh, maybe they could come along with me to do that shadowing opportunity. Other thing to remember is giving them a list of key people and agencies for them to contact and arrange to either speak with or visit. So feedback from students have said that, they don't want this induction, to be packed with everything back to back. What they really do like is having that space, and then they're having some independence to contact different people and arrange it themselves. And as a practice educator, that's also something, we're starting to assess those skills from the beginning, because are they contacting those people? And also if there's more than one student in the team or in the local authority, it could be that the students could do some things together. So also as well, like Sue was saying, we're in a very different world post-COVID than what we were before. So many of us now, we might have either WhatsApp groups, or we might have Microsoft Team chats, or, you know, maybe something else where we all sort of log in and say, hello, I'm here, or also have opportunities to ask questions. So I know there's some teams that have a WhatsApp group, and individuals might say, oh, you know, has anybody found any, you know, nursing homes this week? And so there's that opportunity to sort of feel as a team, even though people aren't in that actual space. Marcy as well has also spoken about this, about preparing. So thinking about the equipment that they're going to need and the space that they're going to sit. So when we're also thinking about the office, we need to make sure that we've also had conversations about their home working environment. So I think we can't always assume that they have got Wi-Fi, that they have got an appropriate desk to sit on. It's rather a chair to sit on with a desk. So make sure you've checked that out, and that, you know, they have got lighting, and in particular as well, they've got an area that it's going to be confidential. You know, and if not, you know, we need to think about, you know, do they need to be in, you know, in a particular office all the time? Or certainly within our local authority, we have an arrangement where students are able to use any office, which can be particularly useful. So it means that they don't have to work at home. Thinking as well about this equipment, I know, you know, last year, you know, having a conversation with a student and her particular learning needs, like Marcia said, you know, it was really important that she had a screen at home. So we normally only give laptops to all of our students, but because of her dyslexia in particular, she needed that screen. So I had to make sure that I located a screen for her to use at home, because she didn't have one. We also need to think about in the office with the desks. I've had another student who, because of their health needs, they really needed to have the opportunity to have a sit to stand desk. So again, it's having those conversations and making sure that within that team there was one of those desks. Also alongside that, you know, we've got to think about our car parking provision. And again, that students, you know, individual needs. Do we say to them, this is the car parking? Or maybe, you know, in the past, I've had a student who, you know, when we've spoken about her health needs, you know, I've made sure then that I've arranged allocated parking for her. Next slide, please, Sue. So, like we've been talking about, we're working in this hybrid world now. So one of the things I think on-site supervisors have to ask themselves is, do you need to change your working patterns while you've got that student? You know, do you need to say, right, I'm going to actually be in the office, you know, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday? And I know that's what some of our on-site supervisors do. Also consider who else is going to be in the team in the office. Like Marcia has said today, she's the only person in the office. So we don't want to be saying to a student, you know, you must be in the office every day if nobody else is there, because you know, it's the value of learning from other people. So what expectations do we have of the student being in the office? So like Marcia says, we need to be clear not only about the days that they're working, but when are they expected to be coming into the office. And having that conversation with the student about any particular health issues they may have, or caring responsibilities that may affect this. What about thinking about the check-ins that we will have with the student? So each on-site supervisor will do the different thing. So do they telephone the student in the morning to say, hello, are you all right? You know, and what do they do at the end of the day? Do they speak to them, or do they maybe send a Teams message? This gives the message to the student that I'm here, I'm available. So you might not be in the same office together, but the student then knows, you know, that you're always thinking about them. Like I said before, you know, we have our WhatsApp groups maybe, or our Teams groups, but is there also a team check-in? So make sure that whatever the team does to gather together, that the student is also involved with that. Marcia also talked about having expectations about the professional etiquette within the working environment and the dress codes. But I think it's also worth us being very explicit about, now that people are working at home, you know, the use of Teams. And I think I have had some students who maybe have forgotten that they're still in that professional meeting. So let's not be wearing our pajamas, you know, still thinking about that professional clothing. Other thing as well, you know, they're carrying their, you know, their laptops with them, but we need to remind them that the expectation isn't for them to be working at home. So, you know, it might be that we need to monitor the hours that they've worked. I know I've been working late sometimes, and I've spotted a student and I've sent a little message, what are you doing on? You know, so we've got to constantly think about their well-being, because, you know, they're going to be, you know, trying so hard to make this placement work. So thinking about this hybrid working, you know, how can a student really understand, you know, the pace of the work of what we expect? That's quite tricky. Years ago, when we were in a busy office, they could see all the workers, they could see that what they were doing, you know, jumping out to go to a meeting, coming back and writing things up. We've lost that now. So I think we have to have more of that overt conversation about the expectations, you know, what, you know, how many people do we expect them to visit a week? How long do we expect that to take? You know, how long do we think the assessment should be written up? Because they might not be seeing that for themselves. Maybe they also need the opportunity to talk to other people about this. Also, you know, remind them about etiquette. You know, we mentioned before, but etiquette in emails. So that's something that's definitely come up before. So I think the key message is, you know, not to assume things, and to make sure that we're supporting the student. Next slide, please, Sue. So the last slide from me, Marcia talked about work being allocated. So this is a very key issue, because once everybody in the team is aware that this student is coming, there can be some excitement thinking, oh, the student can do this work, they can do that work. So we need to remember that the on-site supervisor needs to remain responsible and have an oversight for the work that they're doing. So it might be that the work is allocated by the practice educator or the team manager, or maybe some of the seniors in the team, but the on-site supervisor needs to make sure that they're managing the workload of that student, and the student needs to be reminded to make sure that they're not saying, oh yes, I'll do this to every person, that it needs to come back to the on-site supervisor, and then that work can be managed. So it's great that everybody gets involved, but we need to make sure that the workload is protected of the student. So as we're talking about, you know, this is team around the student, so involve the team to help identify learning opportunities. So prior to the student coming, you know, ask them what can they do, what shadowing opportunities, are there co-working opportunities, what meetings can they attend, can they take minutes maybe for, you know, a meeting? So really think about other people and what they can do, and think about that as the placement evolves as well. So when there's duty calls, you know, can the student support with them? Can there be a second person on the visit? Think as well about the opportunities of screen sharing. So the student might be at home, but another worker could be doing something and then share what they're doing on the screen. I've seen that happen and it works really well, and then the student can ask questions. We all hear us all mention about students that don't drive. Statistically, I'm sure Helen will mention it, but you know, it could be up to 50% now of students. So I think gone are the days when we say, oh no, we all need our students to drive. So I think within each local authority, we need to think about how we can support these non-driving students. So some of them, it's just the fact that they haven't got a car. So for example, you know, can they then have access to the pool cars? So we'd need to think about the process for that. If they're not driving, then think about the learning opportunities. It's all about meeting the professional capability framework. So we need to think about how we can do that, how we can select work in certain areas, and maybe thinking about them getting work from hubs or maybe different telephone assessments. Think about learning opportunities from other services and teams that you work with, and remind the student of the etiquette involved in that. Remind them to ask the team manager and not just go directly maybe to the person they know or the student. So we're always looking for evidence for our assessment of students. So we want feedback from people with lived experience. So we can get that directly from the student, they can email us, or we can also get it directly from team members. Marcia also talked about training and what is mandatory and what is needed. So I think sometimes students can get a little bit overexcited about the training opportunities. So on-site supervisors and practice educators need to make sure that they are only doing what is needed, not what interests them. And also, just last comment, think about how you're going to monitor that all this training has been completed. Thank you, Sue.
Thanks very much, Jane. And now I'm going to introduce Rosie Summers, who is a practice educator and is going to talk to us from the perspective of the practice educator. Thank you, Rosie.
Thank you, Sue. Hi, I'm Rosie Summers. I am a practice educator, but I'm also a senior practitioner in an adult social care team in the south of Shropshire. I've been qualified, I've worked it out when Jane mentioned how long she'd been qualified. I think I've been qualified about 16 years, and I've been a practice educator for 10. But that by no means makes me any sort of expert on the matter. I'm regularly humbled by the drive and determination of our students. And I'm always learning, especially when it comes to theory and how to apply that to practice, which I've always struggled with. But the students are pretty good at this. As Marcia and Jane have both said, first and foremost, we want the student to meet their full potential. So, and we're only going to be able to do that by allowing those opportunities within the team. And the student needs to feel part of that team, but also the team need to feel part of that student journey. So in the south, which is where I practice, we've got 2 practice educators who are both senior practitioners. So we also have line management for the team. So we really do rely on other people to come around the student. We can't do everything ourselves. We need to be able to offer opportunities that we can't provide. So before the student comes, well in advance, we warn the team to make sure they're on board, which Marcia explained in her presentation. We used to ask the students to approach various members of the team and ask for shadowing opportunities as part of their induction, because we used to think that that was a really good way for them to get to meet the team and all the different staff members. But it was a little bit hit and miss when it came to shadowing opportunities, and it ended up in gaps in the students' calendar. So now we've changed it a bit. I remember as a student myself, it was quite nerve-wracking as a student begging for shadowing opportunities in a team that was unprepared for me to be there. So we prepare the team well in advance. We have a 2-week, very set induction, regardless of the students' learning need. It's the same induction that we give to new staff coming into the team. And that includes meeting the team, finding out everybody's names and roles, meeting the wider team who connects in with adult social care. So we've got like mental health, we've got health colleagues as well that link in with the adult social care team. So that would be involved in that first 2 weeks, including mandatory training and any systems trainings, any shadowing of office-based assessments, which we call hubs, and duty, which is always a favourite because you can get a lot of different variety on duty, and even as a shadowing exercise you can get to see quite a lot and hear quite a lot from the phone call conversations. I know Jane mentioned that it's very useful to have a break within those 2 weeks so that the students aren't having back-to-back meetings, and we do allow for that time to reflect within that. We also have reflection sessions with the wider team, which the students can be involved with. After that, that's when the student, having been a bit embedded in the team as far as they know who they're working with and kind of what we're doing, then through supervision we talk about any gaps, where does the shadowing need to go now. So there's a further 2 weeks where the student decides, according to their learning needs, what they need to do a bit more of. So I'd be asking things like, what do you feel comfortable with? What have you found difficult over the last 2 weeks? What do you want to see more of? What do you feel happy to do alone or with minimal input from another worker? Would it be useful to do some more shadowing where maybe you take the lead but you've got a backup behind you? On the whole, students prefer, my experience is, students prefer to shadow assessments that are being done with maybe an individual that's known to the team already. So they've got some background information rather than brand new people that they're meeting off the fly. And also, yeah, I think shadowing duty is a big one that they always engage with. From week 5, we'd be looking at allocating, depending on the students' needs and whether they're confident enough. I think with the shadowing opportunities, because we no longer sort of rely on the students in the first 4 weeks to go and seek those out for themselves, we ask the social workers well in advance to book out particular days and to make sure that that is full with different opportunities. So they do that as part of their own professional development. It's a given that if you're a social worker, you will be doing this as part of your CPD within our team. So they're quite on board with that. And the students seem to enjoy the fact that their days are completely set out and they've got good opportunities offered through the team. So another thing we've done with students with shadowing, we've got newly qualified social workers and apprentices to shadow our students, co-work a case possibly, and shadow our students because they're used to having feedback. So it's a good opportunity for them to give feedback to that student informally. What we found is the students are less nervous about that. They've come back to us and said there's a less pressure than having a direct observation, and they get that informal feedback from the team. So that's definitely something that we're going to progress going forward. It's something that we've done new this year that we're going to try and roll out next year when we have more students. There's also the practical stuff that Jane mentioned about being involved with a Teams chat, so that you know where people are at any given time. You can buddy up with people in the office so the students know who to go to when me and the other practice educator aren't around or the on-site supervisor isn't around. And it's also a place where other workers can say, look, I've got something really cool and exciting going on, or I've got this complex case, would you like to join me with this? So that takes away some of the difficulties from not always being in the office, because we've got 2 bases in the south, so we're split over 2 offices, so we're never in the same office, you know, more than once in the week. Students can pick and choose which base they go to, but they need to know who's available there and who's on duty and which base they're going to be going to. So that's something that they can take the lead in by using our Microsoft Teams chat. I think that in the last 9 months or so, we've made a lot of progression within the team, within using the team around the student, within using the newly qualified social workers who have just gone through all of this process as a buddy. We've definitely at a position now where I think we're offering a good experience to students. I'm hopeful that's reflected in the next session from the students' voice. If there's any questions, you might want to put them in the chat. I feel like I've been extremely brief, but that's just a practical guide to how we do it at the moment, and that has evolved over many years of trial and error and learning from our students and what they want. Thanks, Sue.
Thank you very much, Rosie. And I'm now going to move on and welcome Mel and Sam, or Melanie. I'll let them introduce themselves. Very much appreciated. They've dipped out of a recall day to university to join us as current students. And so thank you very much. I'll hand over to you and I'll just move the slides across. There we go.
Oh, hi everyone. Hiya. Thank you, Sue. Sorry. Me and Mel, we're both students on the Step Up to Social Work programme at the moment. So we're just here a little bit just to sort of share our sort of experience and how things have been and how we've been supported by our practice educators and on-site supervisors, and sort of just what we think has worked, what hasn't worked so well, and things like that. So just to sort of introduce ourselves, Arusa can't be here today, unfortunately. So she's on the programme as well, and she's working in the northeast area in adult social care on her placement. I'm Sam Ford. I am working in mental health on a placement in the central area, and yeah, so far really enjoyed my placement. So that's me.
And I'm Mel Pilliner. So I'm really enjoying my placement. And I am in adult social care as well on my placement. So if we move on to the next one. So one of the things that we wanted to talk about today was about students who work, because both Rusa and myself actually have part-time roles outside our placements, and it is something that I think certainly when we started the programme, we were sort of advised that it would be very difficult to manage. But I think that what the reality is that, you know, for me personally, as a single person who is also studying but has a home that I'm managing, I have a very generous bursary, but unfortunately that wouldn't cover all my costs. And especially when you factor in things like trains, petrol, fuel. So working is kind of something that's a necessity for me. Outside, that makes my time quite precious. So being organised is really important. So there's definitely time that there's things that I've given up, or voluntary things that I don't do so much of. And my social time is quite limited, but that's kind of part of being on this journey. And the risk of burnout is real, but it's something that I think that I'm very aware of. So if I was to have any concerns, I'd be voicing those and trying to seek the support. So in terms of what support you could offer, I mean, I think if you can be understanding that this is a reality really, and that lots of students do need to work, then that's something that I know that I've really appreciated.
Okay. So yeah, we could. So yeah, I just like to share as well sort of like about my experience and factors around sort of driving. So when this play, I'm very pleased to let you know that I have actually passed my test last week. So I'm very happy about that. But it was before that, it was quite a stressful ordeal sorting out sort of driving and stuff with social work. I can really appreciate the importance of driving when you're doing this job just by the nature of the work you're doing and where you're based. Also, where I am is quite a rural area, so that sort of therefore sort of exceeds the importance of driving on this job. But it's all I think it's really worth noting at the moment. So the numbers of students without driving licenses and that are able to drive is like really increasing. There's and just generally like the demographic of sort of, obviously student social workers vary in age, but like the number of younger people that are driving is becoming less and less. The reasons why for different reasons. So there's just now much since COVID, there is a long waiting time for tests. I had to wait 3 months for mine. There's the rising cost of driving tests and driving lessons. My driving lessons were I can't remember. So I'm 27 now. When I was 17, I tried to learn to drive for a little bit, but I had to stop, and it cost me £25. And when I was learning this time, it cost me £40. So it is really increasing, and also just generally the cost of living. And while I'm a student and I'm not earning a wage as such, I'm having to fund all sorts of different aspects of just general livelihood. And then on top of that, having to pay for all these driving lessons, and then when I pass I have to buy a car and insurance. So there are factors as well. Obviously sort of many city focused local authorities don't require students to drive, which is really positive. And really helpful and enabling for students wanting to go into social work. But obviously not all local authorities are able to accommodate that based on location, so that's important to note as well. However, I think it's really important to make efforts to accommodate students who can't drive in this instance, because of just like the nature of needing more social workers in this profession. So I and it's also something that can reinforce sort of once placement has ended as well. But I just sort of think that they could do this through different ways. Firstly, by sort of accommodating time for tests. Obviously, I think you're on placement to work, but there can be sort of times where you could take an hour out, maybe work an hour later, things like that. I know that would be a real help to people and help take the pressure off. Also more exploration around public transport. I was using public transport before I passed my test, and that was really helpful, and I was really supported on my placement with sort of getting the money back for that and sort of getting reimbursed. I was also using my bike, and that was sort of that was really beneficial as well. So that could be promoted more sort of across the sort of organisation, and I was really well supported in that, so that's really good. And also sort of looking at things like car sharing and joint visits with workers as well, I thought was really good. But I just think it's really worth noting that it's sort of due to the number of students that aren't able to drive at the moment, that's it we could really it's invaluable for local authorities to accommodate that for students, I think, and promote promote the importance of driving for people, but accommodate it for them and support them through that as well. And that's how I felt on my placement. I felt really well supported, and sort of I was a bit worried that I might be stigmatized for it a little bit, but no, I was really well supported throughout the process, and it helped motivate me then to sort of push it forward, and I can drive now. That's really positive. So there you go. And yeah, so we can have the next slide.
I'm so excited for him. But I'm now more careful on the road. No, I'm joking. So we wanted to talk a bit about working hybrid, and in terms of being able to work from home and working in the office, because I know that I've worked through the pandemic in different roles, and obviously seeing that move from kind of everybody being very office based to kind of like everybody working very differently. So, and a lot of people working from home. So some of the advantages, you know, and especially for myself in lots of ways, because I live quite a long way from where my placement is based, is like being able to work from home is helpful in that respect. So it's less sort of travel time, and as I said, my time's quite precious, and I'm completely committed to my placement, and always try to be there, you know, early and things. But it's quite, sometimes it's nice to sort of have that extra half an hour or 3/4 of an hour at home and just be able to relax into the day. Some of the other advantages are online meetings. So we've had some online meetings where they've been students being brought together from across like different stages of where they are in their journey in their education, but also different teams. So that has been like really useful in terms of learning from other people's experiences, but also in networking and trying to kind of like build relationships, because it opens up shadowing opportunities, and just being able to like hear from other people and what's going on in their different teams. And location generally becomes less problematic because some counties are quite rural. So working on teams allows us to sort of be able to communicate really well, or online. And working from home allows us to communicate like immediately, basically, and to be able to sort of share information. I know I've asked questions in some of our Teams chats, and there's been responses from lots of different people who are not in an office with me. So, and that's been really, really helpful. Some of the disadvantages that that you might encounter. I mean, for me, myself personally, working inside the office and being around people and being around the team has been absolutely invaluable. It's been really helpful to kind of listen into conversations, obviously, and to learn and ask questions from other people's experiences. That's been something that I've really, really, really sort of felt I've gained from. But one of the things about that is obviously some of the team members need to be in the office to be able to sort of have that experience. I've been quite blessed because my on-site supervisor likes to be in the office very much. And so that's been a very sort of easy kind of relationship, and I've gained from that. But obviously not everybody likes to be from, and the whole point of working hybrid is that you don't have to be there all the time and that you can work from home, and sort of then does need to be a balance. So what I would say is that it's helpful for, as a student, I think what I've appreciated is that there are people there, and that there are human beings, and I'm not going into an office where I'm sort of being quite isolated on my own, or kind of sat there at a desk and not really knowing what I'm doing, or why am I sat here and there's nobody here. So if you can build that kind of a bit of a team around, so that nobody's sort of on their own as such, or that would be really helpful. The other thing about being in the office is that you do get that chance to sort of pick up on somebody if they're sort of, oh, I'm going out on a visit, would you like to come? So if you're not there, or if I was, you know, working from home all the time, I would be missing out on those opportunities. And that's not helpful in terms of my own experience. And then if I were at home all the time, which is what I kind of, you know, wouldn't advocate for necessarily, it would be kind of, I would be feeling a bit invisible. There's a risk of me feeling invisible. That wouldn't be the case, because everybody's very embracing in our team, and they do check in, and we have the kind of like, what are you up to in the morning? Where are you at? And a login afterwards in our WhatsApp chat, and make sure everybody's okay. But those are risks if they're not very well managed.
Yeah, so sort of having sort of a team of support around the student, just sort of looking now at the sort of like positives and like sort of what does work well and what doesn't work so well. So when we like sort of discussed about this, we sort of thought about like clear roles and expectations from the from our PE and OSS that is really, really beneficial. Just sort of saying, like, when I had my sort of like initial meeting with my practice educator, on-site supervisor, and my tutor from university, when it was really laid out like what it is you'll be doing within the team, what it is you will not be doing, what we'll be expecting you to do, and what, like, how we hope to see you progress. I felt like that was really beneficial, and I could get a better picture of what I'd be doing, and I felt better supported that way. All like the support on hand for the silly questions, sorry, like inverted commas, silly questions. Well, this is it. So, well, I'm like I'm a very curious person, and I do sort of require a lot of question, like, I do like have lots of queries about stuff just to clarify stuff, to make sure, because it's all new to me. So I do have some of these questions that I believe to be silly sometimes, but I'm always sort of like certified that, like, no, there's no such thing. And then I always think to myself, like, do you want to bet? Because I can ask something really silly, but no, it's just someone out there that sort of like non-judgmental approach to sort of like the support that you're getting really, really, really benefits. And because I think sometimes when you've been working somewhere for a certain period of time, you can, and the processes of, like, you can sometimes assume that that's sort of like general knowledge, where it isn't for someone that's just started straight out. So that's really important as well. Understand the impact of personal circumstances, I think, is like really important as well. So sort of just sort of through supervision and sort of just general catch-ups with the student, just sort of making sure that you're aware of just sort of like maybe sort of external factors that might be affecting them as well. Different stuff, like, if they've got just what's going on at home, they might have like we were saying, sort of issues with driving, issues with having to work other jobs, so maybe childcare, things like that as well. And just sort of, it's, when you're on a placement, there's expectations. It's difficult sometimes, but just making sure to, like, accommodate it as much as possible, I think really, really helps. And to make sure that you understand, and that you're sort of concerned and care about it. Structure and planning, I think through supervision really helped on sort of through reflection, then sort of being able to then work through what's going to happen next week and what you'll be expected to do, and the expectations, sort of like week by week, that on this stage you should be able to be doing this, I think really sort of helps. And sort of having like maybe like a bit of a checklist on what it is that you still need to cover and planning around that. Reflective and supportive challenge, I think really, really helps as well. I think, when doing joint visits, sort of like using that time, sort of driving back or sort of coming back, to sort of discuss. Also, it doesn't necessarily have to be like actual sort of theoretical critical reflection, just sort of like I had quite a challenging visit last week with an aggressive service user, and just literally having that sort of having 20 minutes when I got back, just to like decompress and talk about it with someone who's a professional who understands the sort of what that circumstance may be, like, really, really helps. And also sort of enabling sort of peer reflection and like, well, yeah, peer reflection sort of maybe with students as well, and creating a space for students to reflect and share with each other is also like a good learning sort of outcome for them. So yeah, and then also if I just go on to the next slide, we'll just look at the disadvantage, what doesn't work so well. So yeah, just sort of poor communication. That's sort of like a given, really, I suppose. Just not going through the what's expected of them as well. So they sort of like they tie in one to another. So just sort of like, not being around, not informing them of what's going on. If you're in a circumstance where sort of like you're not sure what's happened, you're not sure what to do, not having that person there with you to sort of guide you, or sort of just give you like a bit of a pep talk, that can sort of sometimes have a bit of a detrimental impact on practice sometimes, and also just sort of morale with students. I also just sort of poor welcome to placement. It sort of seems a bit daft saying it, really, but like I was really well sort of introduced to the team through different, even before I started, like I had the actual initial meeting with my tutor and my practice educator and on-site supervisor, and then my on-site supervisor just like invited me into the office to have like an informal, just sort of like see the office, see where you'll be based, meet the team, get to know me a little bit. And that really sort of helped, just sort of even before I started the placement. So I could start my placement feeling confident and feeling like I know what I'm doing. And I just sort of thought that, like, you do not on this, and like I've heard from like previous sort of like, positions, like when there's been students that they haven't had that, and they just kind of feel a little bit out of the loop, and because of that they didn't have that sort of good communication and support from the get-go, it's sort of had a bit of a knock-on effect on the rest of the placement. So I think that's really important.
Sam and Mel, sorry to interrupt you, but I'm just mindful of the time. It's really interesting, and I really appreciate everything that you're saying. But no, it's really good. I out of my own curiosity though, could we I think lack of visibility, without preempting what you're going to say, I'm curious about your last bullet point on there, unfriendly student stigma.
Yeah.
Could you just explain that one just for me personally, and then I think I am going to need to move on to the next person, but thank you so much.
Fine. Sorry, I do that long. So yeah.
No.
Thanks. So yeah, unfriendly student stigma. So it's just I previously worked in social services as admin, and just from there my sort of experience was sometimes when students would be there was just the sort of thing of like, oh, we've got a student, oh right, this is going to create a lot of work for us, and just sort of like that sort of approach that it's just sort of like you're there doing them a favor. And you just sort of like, oh well, we'll just go and like give them a bit of work to do. That doesn't. It's self-explanatory.
That was what you meant.
That was what it was. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much to both of you for all the work that you put into that presentation, and for dipping out of uni to join us. And if you need to go back into uni straight away, feel free to disappear or hang on till the end of the session if you can. It's completely up to you, but thank you very much.
Okay.
Thanks for having us.
Okay then. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. And I will just now introduce the last person, last but by no means least. Oh, I'm sorry, I actually skipped their that slide, but I can send out the slides to everybody afterwards, and we'll jump forward to introduce Helen.
Okay, yes, so I'm Helen, I'm a lecturer in social work at Keele. I've been a practice educator for, I've just tried to put this, almost 20 years, and qualified for 24 years. So, and worked in workforce development as well as placements at the university, so quite a lot of experience in this area. Something else to have a look at, I guess, for you as a practice educator, thinking about how you find your own support as a practice educator or on-site supervisor, and a little bit about I'm trying to try not to overlap with what others have said. There may be some, but I'll try to skip over those areas. But I think the key thing for me is really sort of making sure that you have your support in place as a practice educator. So before you even sort of think about either undertaking the practice educator or supervisor role, make sure you're having those discussions with your managers or your supervisors. Make sure you can identify what support might be available to you within the team. So not just the team around the student, but let's think about the team around the practice educator as well. Often you will hear practice educators talk about my student, or the team talking about their student. Actually, this should be the team student. You may be the one who has the responsibility for the assessment and for the supervision of that student, but actually that student is on your team. So having that thought about working with your manager to think about how we're going to get, the team on board here. Ask as well, is there any reduction in case allocation? Thinking, sort of getting your managers on board with the idea that this isn't additional to your workload, this is part of your workload. What are the expectations of your manager? Are they saying, well, your student can help you with your cases, so anything that's yours, you work out what the student shares, but we're not going to reduce that? Or actually, are you going to say, well, maybe what I'm working on isn't going to be conducive for that student, so let's have a look at what work's coming into the team and how we can distribute this and allocate work that meets the students' learning objectives and their assessments. So let's have a think around, how do I work with my manager, with the person who allocates the work within the team, as to what the student is going to get and how I'm supported within that, and I guess the supervision of that work. Make sure that you're putting the practice educator or supervisor element of your role as a standing item on your supervision agenda. It's not the thing you discuss before the student starts and then don't talk about again. This is part of your workload, so keep it as a standing item. When if you're about to undertake your PEPS training, talk to your workforce development teams and the leads there about what support is available from them. Is there any study time built into that contract? Different local authorities, I teach on a PEPS course, and different local authorities will vary depending on what they offer. Some have been offering a couple of days toil for having a student, so that because they recognise that that it takes additional time to write those reports. Others may give a payment, an honorarium payment that recognises that additional time. Thinking about if there's any expectation of that workload relief, as I said, to allow you to undertake the course, because if you're taking the course and having a student, that's actually quite a big chunk of your time within your own working role. So how is that going to be managed? And you'll also have a mentor and assessor when undertaking a PEPS course, so make sure that you're using those mentoring sessions as well for that support. All I would say as well is just make sure if you've done the PEPS or you're undertaking it, try to keep contact with others that have been on your course, as well as those in your team. It's about that peer support as a practice educator. So making the practice educator role quite distinct to the social worker role as well. So where's my practice educator supervision? Where's my mentoring? Where's the support around me from peer group as well? And then find out whether there's any sort of practice educator support groups or forums within your organisation. So there's often students will get together, there's a student forum, and you can encourage your students to go to those. But also have a think about, are there forums facilitated for practice educators specifically, maybe once a month or every 6 weeks, particularly during the busy student periods? And how do you, can you tap into them? Or if there aren't any, talk to the relevant people about actually how could we set these up and facilitate them, and what do people want from those. Okay, next slide. So having support yourself within your team with the student, we've talked about quite a lot about this, so I don't want to reiterate too much, and I'm going to sort of not read through, but think about, we've talked about shadowing opportunities. Ask them about if there are pieces of work that the student could undertake. So you might go through a manager in that discussion, because your manager's got oversight of the workload of the whole team. It might go, a shout out to the team. The student is looking for a learning opportunity that will give them the experience of this. I haven't got anything at the moment. Has anybody else got something that they could offer to the student, that they could either co-work or do a piece of work specifically with you that will meet that particular learning need? Make sure it's evidence to the PCFs as well. I think that's one of the key things when we talk about assessing the student, and I think something that the students themselves touched on in the last couple of slides was about expectations. There is some research out there, I think it's Claire Stone's research, when she looks at transparency in practice educator, and she has her TAPE model, transparency in practice education model, which she talks about, and in the research that led to that was talking about actually students were coming back saying they don't know how they're progressing, they don't know whether they're meeting expectations or not, because unless there's an issue, people don't seem to remember to sort of say, this is, you're doing well, or you're on target, or you're on track. But if we have a clear plan and clear set expectations, and we link things to the PCFs as we go along within supervision, then that student will actually see how they're progressing as well. So that helps to build a really good relationship between yourself, the team, and your student, in that, everybody knows where they're at and where we're up to. Talk to your team as well about how they can help with the assessment of the student, and that's about giving you little bits of feedback. If they have done a piece of work with the student, encourage that team. You don't need war and peace and massive reports. An email with a couple of sentences in it saying the student attended, they were on time, they asked relevant questions, they were interested, is as much feedback as you need sometimes. If you've got something specific, you can ask them specifically, what was the student, how were they in regard to this particular matter. But do kind of encourage your team to provide you with regular feedback if they are working with that student. And also, just regular feedback about how has the student been in the office? Are they taking calls? Are they talking to others? How do they kind of feel like they're kind of fitting in? It's not just about, what the student is sort of doing in terms of specific work, but actually generally, are they managing? Do they seem to be integrating? Do they seem to be keeping themselves to themselves and maybe isolating themselves? Without that feedback, particularly in that hybrid world, we're not necessarily going to know. And also, as I say, just remember feedback is positive as well as, you know, the developmental and constructive criticism that people are very willing to give, but we forget sometimes to give that positive reassurance that things are going well and this was actually really good. And I think also with support with your student to take some of the again, to sort of spread the load and share some of that workload is to encourage your student to attend any student forums that's within the local authority or within the organisation. It will really help with their learning and development, their peer learning, the discussions with other students, and thinking out about specific, you know, perhaps challenges that are happening, you know, with the families that we work with across the social work sort of spectrum, as it were, and any particular core themes that might be coming up. Okay, next slide, please. Assessing your student. All I would say in that, I don't want to go over too much. You know, you're getting views of others, so you get feedback from your team. Draw from your wide range of learning opportunities from across your team. We've already talked about all of that. If you're not sure where the student is sitting or whether they're on track yourself, my advice to any practice educator is always look at the PCFs above and below. What are they saying? What's the difference in language there? So if you're thinking about, I'm not sure if this student is kind of on target or am I expecting too much of that student, it's always helpful to look at the PCFs from above and below and say, you know, are they at end of first placement level when really they should be at qualifying level? Or actually, are they at, am I expecting too much? Am I assessing them at ASYE level because I'm thinking of them as a newly qualified coming into my team in 6 months' time, as opposed to actually, this is where they are now. So have a little look at the language that's used within the PCFs. The domains are the same, the language and the level of, I guess, autonomy within those domains is what shifts. And use supervision creatively as well to draw out that student evidence as well, the knowledge and value base, and make sure you're using that kind of creative supervision and allowing time and space for the students to express their views on various things. So make sure it's reflective and not just case direction. Okay, next slide, please. Don't want to dwell too much on the assessing side of things. The role of the university then, this is kind of what I've been asked to sort of really kind of add to in terms of support for yourselves as practice educators and for students. So just to make you aware that before any student starts on placement with you, the university is undertaking DBS checks. You'll have a look at those. We do encourage our students to make sure they're showing certificates to you, and we do have, I suppose, agreements in place across those placements that they are transferable for placement purposes within a reasonable sort of time frame. Otherwise, we ask them to do another one. They'll do readiness for practice and have to pass a readiness for practice assessment. And Sue touched on the sort of the task and finish group. There's more information that will be kind of available around some of that forthcoming, I'm imagining. The students will, so the university will place a request for the placement with the organisation. So we've already done quite a bit of screening in the background before the student profile comes to you. We'll have looked at, you know, the student's geography, where they live, any wider commitments. So if they've got childcare and they need to be back at nursery to pick their child up from nursery, we're not going to be putting them on a placement that's an hour and a half's commute away. They're going to be prioritised for the more local ones, that kind of thing. We'll also have asked them questions around any reasonable adjustments, that kind of thing, and having those kind of conversations in the background as well where needed. Placement preparation we do with students, so they do the readiness for practice, but there's also placement preparation sessions that happen at the university for students, so they should be well prepared to sort of come out on placement with you. Most universities will offer briefings for practice educators and on-site supervisors. So if you're new to the student course for that particular student, or you've not taken a student from that university before, it's always helpful, or for a while, because sometimes things change, it's helpful to attend those briefings if you can. Also, universities will provide you with handbooks and guides, etc., for the placement. So make sure that you're having a look at those when they come out. And I think it's been talked about before, but the learning agreement meeting, the university is involved in that, and that's a chance for you to get to know the tutors for the student, who I guess is your initial point of contact if there are any concerns or issues. So it's worth making sure that you kind of know who that person is and that you have met with them as part of that learning agreement meeting. During the placement, so the tutors don't disappear, they are available for both student and practice educators if there's anything that is happening on placement, or anything that the student is unsure of, any sort of pastoral needs sort of over and above what happens on the placement. There is, the tutor support there. And I would always kind of encourage, if the student's worried about anything from a university perspective, to refer them back to that tutor. Don't try and take that on board yourself. If it's a university issue or a university thing that's happening, refer back to the tutor, sorry. There's also often a placement lead or placement team within the university who can answer any questions or queries, and maybe be supporting around the whole placement process if things aren't going according to plan. There are student callback days, which the students should be attending. They, for the most part, they are mandated, so they should be there, and you can talk to the student about that. But making sure that when they are, asking that student to take responsibility for it, and making sure that they're touching base. It's also another opportunity for that student. We talked about feeling like they belong to the team, but making sure they feel like they belong as a student to that university, and they haven't just left for 6 months to do a placement. It's really important that they have that peer support back in the classroom. University will support with any concerns or action planning meetings as and when, if they come up. They will support with placement assignments as well. So, there may be an element of your sort of talking about, selecting particular issues that they might, or things they might want to write about. But they should always check in with their tutor about the academic requirements and are they on the right lines for that. There will be procedures that the university provide for any early end or termination of placement where that may be deemed necessary. And also there is a wider student support services, including mental health support services. I know there's been some sort of training and things around student mental health that practice educators and workforce development leads and things have undertaken recently. So usually information is available on the university websites, but reminding the student that they have got those wider wellbeing support services available to them. And there can be things like hardship funds if a student is really struggling financially. There's often hardship funds that can apply for as well. And I think that might be my final slide, Sue. Is that right?
Thank you, Helen.
I have rattled through that, but I'm very conscious of time, so I've tried to make sure we're finishing with any questions as needed, or people can get off at 11 as planned.
Thank you. So just to say, the last two slides were just references which will be available obviously when this is recording and on the website, and reference a template that I spoke about in that task and finish group that looked at readiness for placement practice, and the previous YouTube video on team around the student. I do want to just say thank you so much to everybody who has contributed to this morning's session, and apologies, the timing went a little bit astray, and apologies to all of you as well that I cut the last slide off the student voice presentation, but hopefully when we all look back at it, it will be self-explanatory.